So, I'm reviewing a Star Wars movie.
Nothing can go wrong.
G'day guys, my name is Caleb, otherwise known as the Critic Kebab, and I'm reviewing Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. This is a movie that will inevitably be so divisive that it's not fun to talk about with most people. Yay! The conclusion to the Skywalker saga is directed by J.J. Abrams, the same man that directed The Force Awakens. Now, I have extremely mixed feelings, and it's very difficult to discuss this movie without spoilers, so I recommend you go see the movie. This is going to be a full spoiler review, so if you have not seen the movie, you have been warned. Now, please understand that these are my personal thoughts on the film, and we will disagree on some things. It's also important to mention that there are both things I liked and disliked in the film, in addition to a few storytelling decisions that I hated. That is why I'm breaking up my review into the good, the bad, and the ugly of The Rise of Skywalker. It is painfully obvious, but the lack of a unified vision for this sequel trilogy has ultimately led to its downfall. And unfortunately, J.J. Abrams is left trying to clean up the mess he set up in Force Awakens, as well as do damage control for The Last Jedi. As a result, we get an attempt at a fan service film that just feels rushed, convoluted, and unintelligible. Trust me, I really wanted to love this movie.
Believe me, I wish that I could just wish away my feelings, but I can't.
I will start by talking about the things I liked in Episode 9. And firstly, the crew dynamic between our main characters was great. Finn, Rey, and Poe all bicker a lot, but their back and forth was quite entertaining. And there are tons of amusing moments that make this feel like a solid adventure film. This was definitely accomplished when Poe is light speed skipping in the Falcon. This was a chaotic and fun chase sequence that really gave me the fun vibes of Star Wars again. The next thing, which I actually loved, was the Jedi training course that Rey was completing with the guidance of Leia, her master. The original plan for this sequel trilogy was that Episode 7 was Han's movie, Episode 8 was going to be Luke's movie, and Episode 9 was going to be Leia's movie. Unfortunately, because Carrie Fisher passed away before the making of this movie, and the fact Colin Trevorrow, the original writer-director of Episode 9, got fired before production, gave J.J. Abrams an impossible task to not only wrap up a story 42 years in the making, but also provide a satisfactory conclusion to such an iconic character with an actress that just wasn't there. As a result, the team incorporated unused footage and deleted scenes from The Force Awakens and tried to craft a story and moments around Leia. For me personally, as someone who is familiar with the filmmaking techniques that they used in order to include her in this movie, it was a bit jarring, and there are a few moments that are stilted. But regardless, it was a genius way of including her in this story, despite it not working 100%. I'm also really glad they kept the mysterious Force connection between Rey and Kylo in this movie. It led to some really cool stuff. First being when Kylo steals the necklace off Rey. As their connection grows stronger, the easier it is for them to physically interact. And the fight scenes they have like this were filmed terrifically. The moment with Kylo fighting Rey when she's in his chambers was awesome. And the way it's revealed where she is with Vader's mask falling to the ground was awesome. In saying that, did Kylo just leave Vader's mask there? I don't remember him picking it up, which probably means it got destroyed when Kijimi gets blown up later. But the reason Rey is in Kylo's chambers to begin with is to get the dagger which Chewbacca had previously held onto, and his death fakeout really got me. I legit thought they killed Chewie, and I was just about to be so pissed. And then they finally revealed he was still alive. This was an effective use of misdirection that ultimately has consequences because Rey, whilst she holds back the carrier ship with the Force, which was awesome, she taps into the dark side and shoots lightning from her fingertips. This was a cool moment, but we'll talk about the story ramifications later on. The lightsaber fight sequence between Kylo and Rey on the ocean was visually stunning to look at, and had some small moments of greatness, especially after Rey stabs Kylo with the red lightsaber. Very symbolic. But when she says to him, "I wanted to take your hand," Ben's hand. Now that really got me in the feels, and that was a great line of dialogue. In saying that, I am disappointed by a few aspects in this sequence, mainly the fact that there is hardly any music. The scene relies on the atmos and sound effects, but I just wish John Williams had given us an epic score that rivaled Duel of the Fates or Battle of the Heroes. But otherwise, this was a serviceable action sequence. Now, we all anticipated this, but Luke Skywalker returns, and I really enjoyed the moment when Force Ghost Luke lifts his X-Wing out of the water. A great callback to Empire Strikes Back. And there were a few other small moments spread across the film that I did enjoy. For example, when Rey impatiently takes the skimmer towards the Death Star wreckage. Because one of the key aspects of being a Jedi is being patient. And Rey going off alone was a good moment to illustrate she is leaning more and more into her dark side. Now, I'm very curious to see how the fanbase reacts to the final moment with Rey when the voices of past Jedi speak to her in order to spur her on in the final confrontation against Palpatine. You of course hear the voice of Luke Skywalker, but also Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker, both versions of Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Ewan McGregor and Alec Guinness, Qui-Gon Jinn, Ahsoka Tano, Mace Windu, Yoda, Luminara, Adi Gallia, Ayla Secura, and even Kanan from Star Wars Rebels. As cool as this moment is, and it is a very well done moment when Rey exclaims, "And I am all of the Jedi." But there are just so many questions I have regarding the logic of this moment. It's a cool moment, but doesn't really make any sense based off the previously established canon material that we have about Jedi being able to commune after death and Force ghosts and all that type of stuff. However, it is undeniable that this is a beautiful film to look at. And honestly, I can't fault any of the acting either. Daisy Ridley is fantastic. Adam Driver and John Boyega do a great job with the material they are given. And special shout out to Oscar Isaac, who did some really cool things with Poe this time around. Now, even though R2-D2 has been completely disrespected throughout this entire sequel trilogy, C-3PO was great in this film, and everything with him I absolutely loved. And of course, Ian McDiarmid as Emperor Palpatine was incredible, and looked great as the character once again. But this is now where we get into the bad in The Rise of Skywalker. The crawl immediately establishes that Palpatine is back. And it actually sets up a really intriguing story. The dead speak, and Supreme Leader Kylo Ren is determined to destroy any threat to his power. What an interesting story setup. The First Order and Kylo Ren versus Palpatine and the Empire versus Rey and the Resistance. Three distinct factions facing off against each other for control of the galaxy. But nope, we did not get any of that. The very first scene in the film has Kylo discover Palpatine on Exegol, and then they just team up immediately. This moment just kind of makes the final paragraph in the crawl obsolete. Actually, a lot of this movie makes both Force Awakens and Last Jedi obsolete when you think about it. I understand that Palpatine has been supposedly pulling the strings from behind the scenes, but I can say with absolute certainty, because it is painfully obvious, but bringing Palpatine back was a panic move from the filmmakers, and he was never originally part of the plan, and anyone who says otherwise is speaking bullshit. My biggest fear coming into this movie was that they would bring Palpatine back just to be a familiar and menacing villain that we already know, and then just defeat him so easily at the end. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we got. In saying that, I did come into this movie optimistic, Because Star Wars has a reputation of bringing characters back from the dead and doing some truly amazing stories with them. Darth Maul is the prime example. Because of that, I was hopeful. But my biggest fear became a reality. And Palpatine's physical return is one of the many confusing aspects to me. Like, I just don't understand how they bring Palpatine's physical form back to life. Because he literally gets thrown to his death, and then the Death Star gets completely blown up. It's the same with the Death Star wreckage. That never gets explained as to how it exists. Because if you've seen Return of the Jedi, the whole thing gets vaporized. Not only do they completely undercut the Chosen One story and redemption of Anakin Skywalker in Episode 6, but they just expect you to go along with this new story without ever explaining any of it. I'm sorry, but this is just lazy screenwriting. Oh, and by the way, Hux is a spy. Because The Last Jedi turned the First Order, and Hux especially, into a joke, it would be impossible to keep him around and feel any sort of menace. So that's why they replace him with General Pride, played by Richard E. Grant. This was one of many moments that just felt like Last Jedi damage control, and it honestly took me out of the film, despite Richard E. Grant being terrific in the role. Another example of this was when Force Ghost Luke catches the lightsaber and says, "A Jedi's weapon deserves more respect." This is clearly a dig at Rian Johnson's decision to make Luke fling the saber off the cliff. Now, the scene with Han Solo, I still have mixed feelings about. It genuinely surprised me to see Harrison Ford, but I can't help but feel that this is just a fan service cameo. And I understand what they are trying to convey in the scene, but I just don't think it fully works for me. I believe if Carrie Fisher was still with us, that she would have been the one force projecting herself to commune with Ben. Because whilst it isn't very clear, that is what Leia is doing when she passes out, projecting that memory into her son's mind. Now, I know lots of people will enjoy Kylo's turn to good in this movie, but to me, it just feels rushed and unearned, exactly like Anakin's turn to the dark side in the prequels. This was one of the biggest disappointments to me, was the redemption of Ben Solo. The last bad thing I want to quickly mention is at the end when Maz Kanata gives Chewbacca the Yavin Ceremony Medal from the end of A New Hope. This was a completely unnecessary piece of fan service. Now, let's get into the ugly parts of this movie. And I can imagine this being one of the biggest points of contention amongst the fanbase. But it is revealed that Rey is a Palpatine. Kylo says that your father was the son of Palpatine. A story thread that completely changes the sequel trilogy. I'm sorry everyone, but I hate that Rey is a Palpatine. One of my favourite moments in The Last Jedi is when Rey admits her parents were nobody, that she didn't come from somewhere special. I loved this moment because it illustrated that anyone can have the Force and anyone can be special, despite where you come from. And this revelation just completely undercuts this moment and serves a portion of the fanbase who wanted her to be related to someone. Palpatine having children or an extended family has never been set up previously, and again goes unexplained, and they just expect you to accept and go along with it. I'm sorry, but I cannot watch The Force Awakens and Last Jedi now with this new information in mind and enjoy those movies the same way. I hated this plot twist. Also, one of the most underwhelming aspects of this entire trilogy, but mainly this movie, is the Knights of Ren. These were a bunch of badass characters established in The Force Awakens, not addressed at all in The Last Jedi, and their inclusion here was so forgettable. I very much so feel like they suffer from the Star Wars coolness effect. They look really cool, you don't know much about them, and that's it. We've already seen that in this trilogy with Captain Phasma, and of course the infamous Boba Fett. An action scene where Ben Solo fights the Knights of Ren sounds really cool, but what we got excluding the lightsaber exchange with Rey, was not that compelling. This movie doesn't give you any interesting story details that make you care for these characters. So when Kylo, the former master of the Knights of Ren, turns on them, you don't feel anything. There's lots of moments in this film that should be emotionally impactful and satisfying, but just aren't at all. But what I would argue is among the biggest travesties in this story is that Kylo/Ben never has a scene with Luke Skywalker. Luke's final words in The Last Jedi are "see you around, kid." And considering this is the conclusion of the Skywalker saga, them not having a scene together is a massive mistake. From a certain point of view, you could argue that this is a good wrap up to the sequel trilogy. But no one can say that this does a good job at concluding the Skywalker saga. Now, there's plenty of things I could pick apart in the third act, but to my dismay, and I can't believe this actually happened. But before Ben dies, he and Rey share a sexually charged romantic moment and start making out. I cannot believe literal fan fiction made it into a Hollywood blockbuster on this scale. And this was the most unnecessary moment in this entire franchise. Not only has this never ever been set up previously, but Kylo and Rey have always felt, to me at least, to have had a brother-sister type relationship. So this sudden and unearned makeout sesh just felt cringeworthy. Now, that's all the ugly in The Rise of Skywalker. But there are a few more things I want to touch on. I mentioned it earlier, but the ending is completely rushed. Palpatine is defeated, and just like that, the Sith fleet and all the First Order are eradicated around the galaxy, and we get a Return of the Jedi-like celebration, as well as a Wicket cameo. So much of the final moments is J.J. Abrams just throwing fan service at the screen. And Rey going to Tatooine is a perfect example of that. She goes out there to bury Luke and Leia's lightsabers, and I understand it's meant to be symbolic, but it just doesn't work for me. It is also revealed that Rey has constructed her own new lightsaber from the parts of her staff, and the blade color is yellow. I'm disappointed she didn't craft a double-bladed lightsaber, but I am intrigued to find out why her blade is yellow, because in canon, a yellow lightsaber is used by the Jedi Temple Guards. But she is obviously not that, so I am interested to hear the explanation. Because, God forbid, we get any explanations in this movie. And the final moment of the film and Skywalker saga is Rey looking off into the distance, seeing Force Ghost Leia and Luke, and then answering the old lady's question with, "I'm Rey Skywalker." Now, I will take credit for this, despite clearly not having any proof, but years ago, after The Force Awakens came out, I predicted that Rey would not be a Skywalker by blood, but she would adopt the Skywalker name, and that's exactly what I got. So despite the whole final scene being completely contrived, I did like that final revelation. In conclusion, this movie takes a big swing, and there are some high highs and some low lows. The screenplay makes no sense in so many areas, and the story they are trying to tell is rushed and convoluted, and the payoffs we get for certain things just fall flat. I must admit, watching the film the first time, I did enjoy the thrills and felt the phantom menace of Palpatine. Unfortunately, the more and more I think about this movie, the more and more issues I have with it. The cast is fantastic though, and there are plenty of moments that provide the fun thrills of a Star Wars adventure. The entire film looks stunning, so from an artistry standpoint, big thumbs up. But from a story perspective, I just felt pandered to, and as a result, disappointed. My grade for Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is going to be a B-. I can guarantee this is not the movie that will unify the Star Wars fandom. J.J. Abrams truly did have an impossible task. His attempt to course correct and service the fans has ultimately led to the downfall of this film. He tried to appease a fandom that can never be pleased. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you're new. And may the Force be with you.
You're glad that you're finishing, but savoring every moment because you know it is the last.